Hello, Reflections. This is Deaconess Dr. Gabrielle St. Partner with you all, and I'm here to share my testimony in regards to domestic violence. We have an awareness month for a reason. There are so many people who are going through this silently, and it builds. And I wanted you all to know that at the end of the road, for anyone who's going through it, I'll start with this part. There is light, there is love, and there is God. For me, it started with the relationship that I was in right after college. I was finishing up my master's degree, and being where I was, and I grew up Catholic, and I didn't have the relationship with God that I have now. I wound up in a relationship with somebody who started off, as it often does, who was complimenting me and showing me attention and showing me affection. And I didn't take it for what it really was. It was his insecurity and his desire to basically have control over me. My issues didn't start forming until he saw that I was committed in the relationship. We started fine, and then he started getting upset and angry at certain things that I had to do for my job, I had to do with my sorority, with other community groups that I was a part of, and everything wound up being about him and just blaming me for not being around and not valuing him and not considering him and making me feel like I was inconsiderate or I was doing something wrong. And it was a crazy switch to see a transformation in his behavior and his reaction and response to me, to a point where I didn't even realize I was in a cycle. We would have good days where he would buy me stuff and buy me food and come around and be really sweet. And then whenever I might have done something that seemed so normal to me in my life, it would spark something, and he would get so angry and would say things that became more and more hurtful. I had my 2 degrees at this time, and he was still working on his first, and he would say, you're the genius, you figure it out. And I would say, what's that about? And it would cause these huge arguments. And because of his insecurities, because of his issues that he had, his projection of anger, of hurt, of jealousy, of aggravation towards me elevated. But in the midst of it all, where I was still lost and looking for something I never found. I was still searching for the real relationship that I needed with God. And through this process, miraculously, God drew me closer to him. Every time I went through this cycle, every time there was a jealous rage, every time anyone said hi to me and he would think that I was sleeping with them or I wanted to be with this other person and I was just going to leave him and I didn't appreciate him. And we went through these cycles. At the end of the cycle, I realized I needed something more. The final cycle made me realize I needed something more. I was in this situation for about 2 years. I find myself compromising values that I had for this man. I knew I didn't want to cohabitate because he felt like I didn't truly love him, I didn't truly desire him, or I wasn't truly in the relationship. I found myself having him move in with me. So then he was with me 24/7. I found myself, when I expressed things to him that were deep secrets of my own, him using it against me. And then I saw the enemy come in and really use this man to make me feel like I was nothing. I found myself in a situation where I had a choice to make, whether I was going to truly commit to him or not. And I chose not to commit to him, and we started going our separate ways, but it felt like it took forever to climb out of the dark hole because emotionally I was attached to him in a way that I never thought I would be, to somebody who treated me so wrong. In the midst of it all, I started going to a ministry that I was invited to. One of his friends invited me to. And I started asking questions about God and love, and he wasn't coming down this road with me. And there was a big divide that started happening because he was being used to keep me away from what God had for me. And at the end of the day, when he totally shut me down and shut me out emotionally in every type of way, unfortunately, because of the cycles, I felt I needed him, and I didn't know that I needed God more than I needed him. I found myself crying at work. I found myself unable to focus. I found myself constantly worried about the text message I was going to receive from him, if he was going to show up to my job, which he had done before, yelling and screaming and arguing with me. We became the laughing stock of our college town. When folks would come in from out of town, it was almost a given that me and this guy were going to have some type of a public display where he was just going to try and ridicule me and make me cry in front of everybody. One night I went and left after a party that we were at, and I just walked, and it was wintertime, and I was frozen, and I just didn't know what to do. It was the start of the end. One final night, after a huge argument of us blowing up and him storming out, I really didn't know what to do. Even though I was searching for God and looking for God in the moment, and I started understanding what God can be for me and can do for me as far as covering and protecting me, I felt so hopeless after him walking out, accusing me of things that were just not true, that I was already on antidepressants at that time. And between a combination of antidepressants and whatever pain medicine I had in my house and a bottle of vodka, I tried to take my life because this man would not love me the way that I wanted him to love me. Upon his return, I was already almost unconscious, and I was so embarrassed and so full of shame that I allowed myself to get to this point that when I walked out, got into my car, and tried to drive in a blizzard to get away from it all, I was at a point where I didn't care. It was true hopelessness and the darkest moment of my life to date. But God kept me. Some way, shape, or form, I made it to park my car. I don't remember much about this, y'all. Saints, I don't. But God kept me. I woke up the next morning in my bed. I still had the feeling of the drugs in my system, the alcohol in my system, but I was in my apartment alone. And in that moment, I realized I didn't need this man. This man didn't save me. In that moment, I realized God saved me. I didn't know why God saved me at this point. I'm in my early 20s, in my first full-time career position. And what wound up happening after that was nothing but a miracle of God. It wasn't easy, y'all. It wasn't the end. But I had the strength to have him move out of the house at that time. I prayed to God and found the strength to separate myself from him, to go back into getting my doctorate and moving on with the life that God always had for me. The enemy used this man as a distraction, and I allowed things from my past, my insecurities, my need for love, my need for affection to be filled with the wrong thing, the wrong solution. And so because it is a cycle and because it's not easy to break, there were times when this man being used by the enemy would try to come back in while I was in my doctoral program, to the point where I knew I just had to leave. I had to flee. I had to go. Some of you all know that I did leave West Virginia and I moved to Ohio, but a lot of y'all don't know I left fleeing to get away from this man who had a hold on me emotionally and mentally. I took my position at Ohio State and he still was seeking me out in Columbus, Ohio when I moved. It was not easy. It wasn't easy getting into it, and it wasn't overnight, and it surely wasn't overnight getting out of it. But God, through this process, I learned to rely on God. I learned to read the word for myself, to understand the power of community, of other believers, to get into a church with those who truly believed in God and God's power, to be reinforced, to be enlightened, and to gain the wisdom that I needed to understand what God has for me and who I am in God. It took years, y'all. It took years. But in the end, upon my return to West Virginia to finish my doctorate, I knew God had healed me. I knew God had made me whole. I knew that coming back to West Virginia at that time to finish my degree, I was going to be okay because I put my whole trust in God. He protected me the first time when I almost lost my life due to this mental, emotional, and at sometimes physical abuse that I took from this man. I found my worth in God, and that helped me to complete my degree, to come back to West Virginia knowing that this man had no power over me anymore, to be able to be here in New York, taking care of my mom, doing the things that really matter, and finding a wonderful church home again with reflections, and being able to lead, and being able to be an example. I never knew that back then in my 20s, when I didn't know enough to value myself the way that I should, that I'd be able to sit here today to tell you all that you don't have to take it. You don't have to get to that point of despair and hopelessness. You don't have to allow the words of the enemy that come through people who are hurting you in any type of way to stop you from fulfilling what God has for you. When I put all my faith and hope and love and trust in God, when I believed that Jesus died for me and learned and understood what salvation really meant and what a gift it was, these were the things that helped me to not emotionally go back to a place that I knew I didn't deserve. If anyone out there dealing with something similar or even worse than what I have experienced, there is a way out. And my way out was understanding the love of God, understanding his wonderful forgiveness that he gives, his beautiful mercy and grace that he gives us, knowing that we truly belong to him. And taking that and allowing it to guide me the rest of my life has helped me to the point where I've forgiven all the words. I've forgiven the slaps. I've forgiven the hands that were put upon me. I've forgiven the hurtful things that were said to me. I've forgiven it all. And that's why today I can say this testimony. It doesn't happen overnight. I can do it now knowing that God is continuing to work in me, and he is the source of my strength, and he is the strength of my life.